You know what a lot of people miss? The era of baseball where a ton of players loaded up on steroids and crushed balls like they were a meaningless speck of nothing.
Like that. I like the blue shoes better. Way out of here. On to the roof. He hit it onto the roof across the street. I have never seen that.
We're now pretty far removed from this era. Far enough where most of its iconic players have long been honored with Hall of Fame plaques. But the guys who weren't its most iconic players have slowly faded out into obscurity. And that's why we're here today. To remember players from one of the most commonly romanticized eras in baseball history that the future has not been as kind to. And in order to prove that these players are underrated, I'm actually going to place a definition with actual parameters on this. Every player you're gonna see in this video played long enough during the mid-90s to early 2000s to be on the Hall of Fame ballot, but received 0 Hall of Fame votes. That means that they were consciously pushed aside in the history books by the writers who effectively shaped the legacy of baseball. Forget guys like Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Mark McGwire, and Sammy Sosa not being in the Hall of Fame. These guys didn't even get a single vote. And that was unfair, because these were some really good players I want to put the spotlight back on today, considering history has tangibly underrated them. You don't have to think any of these guys were Hall of Famers, because they probably were a little short of that, but a lot of you are going to remember a guy from this video and think something along the lines of, oh yeah, that guy was good. He should have gotten 1 Hall of Fame vote. Let's give that kind of player some love today. Also, I did do a video about some other guys like this last year, had a couple 90s and 2000s guys in it, so if I excluded your favorite player, you might be able to find a similar review of them over in that video. So yeah, let's do this. Leading off this video with a leadoff hitter. We have a guy who made 3 All-Star teams, won a Rookie of the Year award, hit over 280 in 14 big league seasons, and twice stole 40 bases in a season. We have Rafael Furcal. Furcal is a really interesting player to revisit. He was known as a solid defensive shortstop, even if he'd make a ton of errors, and modern advanced stats are pretty kind to him, as he racked up 15 defensive wins above replacement in his career. Wins above replacement is a good stat. It tells you how many more wins a team would get if they had a specific player over what's considered a replacement level player at the same position. So Furcal was a really strong defender to have, but a net below average hitter. He was more of a gap-to-gap speed kind of hitter, not one of the current day shortstops who could get you 30 home runs in a season. In fact, there really was no hitter who was all that similar to him in MLB history, but that didn't mean the writers believed in his career enough to give him literally a drop of Hall of Fame support. If you go by the stat that balances wins above replacement for career with the best 7 years of a player's career, Furcal is the 50th best shortstop of all time, which is impressive. So now I'm going to talk about a guy who was basically the exact opposite of him, but was way, way better than you think he was. Ryan Klesko loved crushing baseballs, but something I didn't really know about Klesko until researching him for this video is that he had a pretty well-rounded skill set to him. Sure, he hit home runs, 278 of them in fact, but he's also a guy who hit 279 with a 370 on base percentage and 500 slugging percentage for his career. All those were really good. A 500 slugging percentage means he averaged at least a single every other at bat, in terms of total bases hit for, pretty much. And he actually had 2 different seasons where he stole over 20 bases at a success rate of over 75%, which is really good. And at an estimated 28% better offensively than his competition, he had a better OPS plus for his career than Hall of Famers from his time like Barry Larkin, Scott Rowland, and Craig Biggio. His problem was that he was kind of awful defensively. You want to talk about a guy who was the exact opposite of Furcal? Remember how Furcal was worth 15 defensive WAR in 14 years? Klesko was worth almost negative 15 defensive WAR in 16 years, tanking his overall career total in WAR. He was a first base left field type who could never seem to be strong enough at either spot to stand out from his contemporaries around the league. It is still surprising to me that a guy who is this good of a middle-of-the-order bat on multiple different teams that he made the playoffs with, one time winning a World Series, walked a ton, stole some bases, and hit almost 300 home runs, couldn't muster 1 Hall of Fame vote. but that's how offensively loaded this era was. As the steroid era was coming to a close, one of the most unexpected teams to ever win the World Series was a couple minutes away from hoisting the trophy at about 10:50 p.m. on October 25th, 2003. On the mound for the Florida Marlins at Yankee Stadium looking to complete a World Series clinching shutout is 23-year-old Josh Beckett.
Slow roller right side. Beckett picks it up, tags Posada, and the Florida Marlins are world champions.
Beckett may not have pitched the majority of his career in the steroid era, but the most famous moment of his career on the biggest stage in baseball was one of the events that brought this era to a close. Beckett accomplished a ton in his career as well. 3 All-Star appearances, a no-hitter, 2 World Series championships, run prevention about 11% above average throughout his career, a really solid rate of limiting base runners on the mound, and one time being teammates with Yasiel Puig. You would think a guy who, at the very least, was one of the most consistent pitchers of his era would get at least one writer to toss him a Hall of Fame vote. Heck, the guy even has a Hall of Fame type moment in his career, and plenty of actual Hall of Famers don't even have that. His career WAR is also about the same as Hall of Fame pitcher Candy Cummings is, a guy listed at 5'9", 120 pounds, and supposedly invented curveballs. You know, the real alpha male pitcher. But no votes for Josh Beckett, no matter how much you narrative ball him towards one. Troy Glaus hit 320 MLB home runs and parlayed that into a grand total of 0 Hall of Fame votes. Glaus was one of the best third basemen of the early 2000s, hitting at least 37 home runs in a season for 3 different teams, and also being a pretty solid defender at his peak. But even when he played, the guy got 0 love from the writers. In 2000, he was the 4th best player in the entire American League by wins above replacement, hitting a career-high 47 home runs for the Angels. No one even gave him a 10th place MVP vote. His best finish in MVP voting? 30th place. Now, he did admit to federal investigators to taking steroids, but the fact that even before that admission he wasn't getting an ounce of love from the people who hand out baseball accolades is weird. This is probably a good time to remind you guys of my official take on how to review steroid-era players that I first brought up in our Barry Bonds series. I'm not as harsh on them because steroid usage was not really regulated when most of these guys were trying them, and such a high percentage of players were doing it that the sample of guys doing it in the league was way different back then. 1996 NL MVP Ken Caminiti once publicly said that he thought about half the league was doing it. And then Ricky Henderson said that it had to be 49% because he wasn't doing it. So, with that in mind, a guy who was as valuable compared to his competition as Hall of Famer Harold Baines was, not even getting a single Hall of Fame vote is a little weird, and unfairly buries a guy who is putting up way better numbers than he ever gets, or got, credit for. Alright, so how about we talk about a guy who has never been connected to steroids ever. Ray Durham. Don't believe me? Try a Google search of Ray Durham steroids. You're not going to get anything. Ray Durham was a really consistent switch-hitting second baseman who was about as good at 26 as he was at 36, which is really unusual for not just baseball, but like general life fitness. You could pretty confidently count on him for a batting average of about 280 or 290 every year, a walk rate of about 10%, decent to above average stolen base numbers, and more extra base hits than a second baseman typically gives you. What most impressed me is how the guy never really had a drop-off. He was the 10th player in MLB history to have 15 home runs, 20 stolen bases, 100 runs scored, a .450 slugging percentage, and 65 RBIs in 3 straight seasons, doing this from 2000 to 2002. Yes, I know that stat is like as cherry-picked as the one on the Thaddeus Young graphic, but bear with me. 2008 was his last year in MLB, and he still had 35 doubles and a slugging percentage of .432. But after that, no one really gave him a good offer for 2009, and he just chose to retire. Quietly and abruptly, leaving behind a 33.8 WAR career. His most statistically similar player on Baseball Reference, to give you an idea of the kind of player Durham was, Ian Kinsler. J.D. Drew could hit.
Fly ball, well hit, right center field. Hunter back, track, wall, gone!
And everyone knew that from the time he was a teenager. Twice, he was a top 5 pick in the MLB draft. He was a big leaguer by the time he was 22, and his career was solid. Not the kind of player you'd think the hype of a 2-time top 5 draft pick would be, but he's still on this list. He put up way better numbers than one career All-Star appearance would lead you to believe. 5 times he played at least 100 games in a season and was at least 30% above league average by OPS+. His career on-base percentage is over 380, and his slugging percentage pushed 500. Both numbers are really good. With 242 home runs and a tick under 45 career WAR, his career WAR is actually higher than Giancarlo Stanton's, and the two are separated by under a month and a half's worth of games in total. His closest similarity score is to Carlos Gonzalez, who the kids who came up watching baseball in the generation after him probably look back more fondly on. His closest similarity score at the end of his career was to the next hitter we're going to talk about. But first, do you want to see Carlos Zambrano yelling at people?
Save! He just got in! I thought he got him. And Lou's got to come out to keep his pitcher in the ballgame. Well, he bumped him. You can't do that, Carlos. Come on, Carlos.
And he goes out of his mind, screaming at everybody.
Big Z was one of the most unique baseball players I've ever seen in my entire life. For being over a 40 WAR pitcher who would consistently give you about 215 to 220 great innings a season in his prime, he kind of isn't really remembered for his pitching. Think about that for a second. A 3-time All-Star pitcher who 3 times was a top 5 finisher in Cy Young Award voting for being the best pitcher in his league and once threw a no-hitter isn't remembered as a pitcher. That's for 2 reasons. 1, he's remembered for being super animated and angry all the time, like way more than you typically see the average player show. And 2, he could rake. Zambrano hit 24 home runs in his career and 6 in 2006. Steven Kwan, a known good player today, has never hit more than 6 in his career so far in a season. In 2008, Zambrano actually had an OPS plus of 128 in his limited hitting totals. That's pretty good, as we've gone over for plenty of the hitters so far. Then you remember Zambrano played a position that literally doesn't hit at all anymore. Truly, I think the surrounding image of Zambrano's career as the angry pitcher who could smash nukes took away from how people remembered his pitching. 20% above average run preventer in almost 2,000 innings? That'll play. Reggie Sanders was probably the greatest mercenary in baseball history. From 1998 to 2004, Sanders hit 160 home runs, drove in almost 500 runs, stole 145 bases, put up a respectable batting average and on-base percentage, and a really strong .488 slugging percentage. He did this playing for a different team each of these seasons. That's right. A middle-of-the-order bat this consistent and this solid played for 7 teams in 7 different seasons. He changed uniforms like Mies changed their appearance. Sanders was at his best earlier in his career with the Cincinnati Reds, where he finished 6th in NL MVP voting in 1995. His numbers that year were just fantastic, finally helping him get past the image of that guy who charged them out on Pedro Martinez one time. The thing about Reggie Sanders was that the teams who would bring him in as a hired gun throughout his 30s more often than not would wind up being pretty good. 2000 Braves went to the playoffs, 2001 Diamondbacks won the World Series, 2002 Giants and 2004 Cardinals lost the World Series, and oh yeah, he also played for the late 2000s Royals. He was always around winning, except with those Royals teams, respectfully. And for a guy who had over 300 home runs and over 300 stolen bases that played until he was 39 years old, I wonder why we don't talk about him more. I bet the lack of sticking with one team covered up that Reggie Sanders was worth almost 40 wins in his career. Ray Lankford is the only guy I'm putting on this list I've never once watched play, in any capacity. His last season was 2004. I was born in 1999 and probably wasn't consistently following all things baseball for another 2 or 3 years. But man, I wish I saw this man play. He separately gave the St. Louis Cardinals a 40 stolen base, a 15 triple, and 30 home run season. 3 different years, all those happened. His career on base percentage was .364, which if you want to know why that was good, that's the exact same on-base percentage Billy Beane and this man wanted in Moneyball. No joke, play the scene, they want a 364 OBP.
Do you want me to speak?
We're not pointing you yet.
1092.
Divided by 3.
364.
That's what we're looking for.
He also posted 2 different seasons worth at least 1 defensive win above replacement, 38.2 career WAR, and a 123 OPS plus. I'm a simple man. I see a center fielder who was in a steroid era home run derby. I automatically assume the dude could flat out ball. And considering his performance showed a near 5-tool upside for plenty of his career, I feel bad knowing he seemed to drift into obscurity. How is it possible I've ignored a guy with over 50 career WAR so far that managed to drop off the Hall of Fame ballot with 0 votes? Brian Giles was a really advanced hitter. He walked over 100 times in 5 different seasons, with 135 in 2002. That's a Juan Soto-like walk number. His career triple slash is a 291 average, 400 on base percentage, and 502 slugging percentage. His career OPS plus is higher than anyone's on this list, so is his WAR. And from 1998 through 2005 was over 50% better at the plate than his average competitor if you go by OPS plus. But I'll be honest with you, Giles might not have deserved Hall of Fame support at all. He's had a public domestic battery issue. He's banned from San Diego Padres alumni events over that domestic violence problem. A jury has officially ruled that he struck his ex-wife. And I don't feel like putting someone with that distinct of a paper trail up on a pedestal without him properly atoning for it. I get that everyone makes mistakes. I don't want to moral police anybody. But if it's that clear and that distinct, I kind of don't get that much joy out of talking about how good you were. It's a shame because he had a chance to go down as one of the easiest underrated players to get behind in baseball history. So with that put to bed, I want to end this video talking about a guy who was much more universally beloved in baseball circles. Mike Cameron was better than you remember. That's like the exact title of a good Jolly Olive video about him, by the way, that covers him in way more depth than I will. But let's go over the basics. He was a 2-time Gold Glove center fielder who 4 times hit at least 25 home runs in a season. In 2002, being one of the very few to hit 4 in one game. Almost 5, believe it or not. Which, that would have been a club where he would have been the only member. In total, he finished his career with over 46 WAR and 278 home runs. You'd think that'd be good enough to get a single vote, because guys like him definitely don't grow on trees. But the disrespect of Mike Cameron stems, in my opinion, from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes literally. He was the Mariners center fielder directly after Ken Griffey Jr. and was an all-star in just his 2nd season replacing Griffey. He was then the Mets center fielder directly before Carlos Beltran, which drowned out that he was a 30 home run hitting center fielder in New York City in 2004. During his career, those who were in the know respected him greatly. He was known as a guy who frequently mingled and expressed gratitude to the fans through signing plenty of pregame autographs, wrote a children's book to preach messages of teamwork, and generally just shows a very genuine, charismatic personality to him that pops up wherever you see him talking. He's also a fantastic Twitter follow, especially if you like seeing a former ball player crush immaculate grid rarity scores. And by the same metric that showed that Rafael Furcal was a top 50 shortstop of all time, Mike Cameron is the 39th best center fielder in baseball history. That right there is pretty good. What are you the 39th best at in the world? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel for more like this. The majority of you aren't, and it really does help out more than you can imagine. Hey, do we have a funny clip to end the video on for everyone?
Carpenter with a fly ball into left center, and a fan has made his way on the field. On the field.